Yeah, it was, perfect storm, David Gazard, as Eamon articulates there in that that seat alone where Meryl Swanson thought she was done for politically, and then to have that comment and then it was weaponised by Labor, it goes to how effective they were in their own sort of campaign, how nimble you need to be to jump on mistakes, gaffes and so on. But David, what, from a Liberal perspective, if I was in in the Liberal Party and a strategist, the thing that would worry me, among many others, is the margin that you're talking about in a lot of these seats now. Like Bennelong is up around double digits, the support. Parramatta, Dobell, we're talking, they've gone from wafer-thin margins to now double-digit margins, David.
That's right. There's more seats than ever before, and the margins in those seats have blown out. Although I would say this from a historical perspective, because that will concern the Liberal Party and the coalition more generally, no doubt about that. And Eamon is right about Patterson. The Liberal Party was very, very confident all the way into the last week about gaining that seat, and it shows you what can happen if you are, let's use his words, untidy in the last week, and you're up against a nimble and adept campaign. And I think the Labor Party campaign was more nimble, it was more adept, and it used that remark to really press home its advantage there. Whether or not he thought the region, in that way at all, I doubt he did. But it was weaponised and it was used, and any campaign is going to do that. Now, the one thing I would say is this: if you get a swing of that size in this election, it is entirely possible to get a swing of that size in any future election, provided the structural foundations on which that campaign rests are good. I've thought a number of times in analysing this campaign where it was really tight. There was a lot of undecided voters going into the last few days. It reminded me a lot of 1996, where Howard swept to power, and the newspapers on the day all said too close to call. It was 50-50 in news poll, and things just broke against Paul Keating, and Howard swept to power, but was reduced to sandbagging, by 1998. So Anastasia Palaszczuk came back from 7 seats to defeat you can't take these things for granted because you've lost in a big way. If the Liberal Party and the coalition more generally get their act together, they can be back in the game.
The one that really reminds me of, in a way, is 2004, Eamon, because again it was neck and neck, 50-50 on election day, and then you had the handshake 48 hours before from Latham over Howard. It put off all female, so many female voters, and it broke so dramatically that the coalition got the majority in the Senate. Not just a thumping win, but a majority in the Senate. And as David rightly points out, it was one term, and then you had the K-Rudd effect. So things can change quickly. But another point that again the Liberals need to look at is the shift in the vote from among Chinese Australians. It is again, it's actually, from what the numbers I've seen in Bennelong, and Jerome Laxale is going to join me in 40 minutes from now, in fact, to talk about this. But the seats where there are culturally diverse Australians in Bennelong have shifted even further away from the Liberal Party this election. Eamon?
Look, that's absolutely right. And we did talk about this, Kieran, on this show a couple of weeks ago. And I think that's come about largely because, like any group of voters, they get it when someone is saying one thing to them and one thing to everybody else. And that's what Peter Dutton did. He would wander in to Australian Chinese communities, try to pitch to them that, Australia's relationship with China would be at its high point under him. And then he would go out and he would say something else altogether, depending on who he was talking to. And that's the sort of stuff that gets picked up. So I think it's that. But also, too, Australian Chinese voters from non-Anglo backgrounds, they want what everybody else wants, which is a party and a leader that is actually focused on the economy. It comes down to the economy. And I think that Labor absolutely did. It was a great campaign. It was focused, it was disciplined, It talked about the economy an awful lot, about making lives easier, but also they had a track record. I mean, this was not an overnight sensation. This was not an overnight plan. Anthony Albanese had a plan right through the term, despite all of the turbulence, which we've talked about week in, week out. He stuck to that plan, and they got there. They went into an election with a rate cut behind them, with inflation, coming down to 2.9, good numbers in terms of unemployment. I mean, all of those things had already happened. So they sort of they came into it with a sort of record, which people could have a look at. And I think that was also the difference. People want a government that's going to provide the services they need and also manage the economy.
And David Gazard, finally to you, as we called it, the perfect storm, but there were just so many different things that worked against the coalition and its campaign, and among them, I guess I was going to say poorly thought through, but not just poorly thought through, but poorly worked through work from home policy, because they clearly hadn't tested it. Because if they did, they wouldn't have run with it, David.
Look, I think this campaign got off on the wrong foot from the get-go. This was sort of when you think about it, an industrial relations policy that kicked off the campaign, which then meant that the coalition could not campaign at all about the CFMEU. If anything was going to galvanise union members and union memberships, it was work from home and sackings of public servants. So that's where it started, and things went awry. And I can't ever recall a campaign where there was a complete policy backflip of any sort, let alone three, that occurred in this campaign. So, look, let's not mince words. It didn't go well for the Liberal Party. There were a range of reasons for that, but that does not necessarily have to guide future campaigns. I'm sure there'll be a review. There'll be a junking of certain policies. There'll be a recalibration, and all of those structural issues that dogged the coalition in this term are going to be completely different in 3 years' time, and I hope they are different in 3 years' time.
David Gazard, Eamon Fitzpatrick, gents, great to chat. We'll catch you next week.